A lot of things have happened in 2025. There is obviously the clown's presidency, the Minecraft movie, and what else again? Oh yes, SNL's 50th anniversary. To say that SNL is iconic in the world of comedy is putting it very lightly. And sure, some people may believe that SNL has declined in quality over the years, but that's not to say that the legacy it has left should go unnoticed. I mean, it has literally brought us thousands and thousands of comedians that, to this day, people still look back on their material and still laugh at it. With classics like Austin Powers, Anchorman, Mean Girls, and Shrek 4D, to name a few. But those are all just SNL cast member movies. Let's talk about SNL movies based off of their sketches. Now I think it's safe to assume that every Tom, Dick, and Harry knows about the Blues Brothers or Wayne's World. But have any of you heard about Coneheads? Superstar? Night of the Roxbury? Oh come on, you gotta know about the head bobbing scene, it's iconic. But I'm not here to shit on any of these movies. Oh no, far from it. I'm gonna be talking about a movie from these SNL sketch movies that I believe is the peak of comedy. And coincidentally enough, it's the one that sticks out the most compared to the others. And that is MacGruber. The reason why I say MacGruber sticks out among the rest of the filmography is because it was actually the only one released in the 2010s. But before we get into the actual movie, let's instead take a moment to talk about MacGruber and what it is all about. In simple terms, MacGruber is a parody of a show called MacGyver, which is a show about a secret agent who saves the day using everyday household items. With the key difference between this and MacGruber is that MacGruber is more cruder and is presented more unlikable. Nevertheless, the skits were a massive success. So much so that MacGruber even was featured in a Super Bowl ad, which apparently inspired the idea to make the movie. The movie then came out on May 21st, 2010, same day as Shrek Forever After, and it did not very good. Oh no, not just that. It completely bombed at the box office. And to add more salt into the wound, both critics and audiences both hated it. And this is where I come in. And in my own opinion, I don't believe the movie is just good. I believe that it is the peak of comedy. And here I am going to tell you why I believe MacGruber is the peak of comedy and why it should get its own time in the sun. MacGruber follows, MacGruber, who is presumed dead for around 10 years, relating to the death of his former fiancée Cassie by his enemy Dieter von Kunz. In the present day, Dieter gets hold of a nuclear warhead and intends to blow up Washington DC with it. And wanting to get some revenge on Dieter, MacGruber accepts the mission, and teaming up with Vicky St. Elmo and Sergeant Dixon Piper, this ponders the question, can MacGruber save the day? When reviewing a comedy movie, it's important to understand what makes the comedy work. But there is one thing I want to take from the book of what makes comedy work, and that word is expectations. And to start off this section, MacGruber is a very unlikable character. He's argumentative, full of himself in both personality and achievements, and all around incompetent. But the key word as to how I describe MacGruber is the word incompetent. And for as long as comedy has existed, comedy has mostly been based off of incompetent people. The reason as to why protagonists in comedy movies are usually portrayed as incompetent is because it allows for more jokes to be told, and therefore be more funny. I think a great example as to what I mean by this is the movie Superbad, in that the main characters have different personalities relating to their awkwardness that helps make the comedy more funny. But unlike a movie like Superbad where the characters somewhat get redeemed by the end, MacGruber has absolutely no redemption whatsoever. This links back to my point about expectations on how we assume that MacGruber is going to be redeemed in some way, and then he just doesn't. But consider we have an unlikable character as our protagonist, why do I think it's the peak of comedy even though the main character is a douchebag? Well, comedy also has to be written, you know? And the movie is definitely not short of jokes relating to MacGruber's incompetence. One of the most notable jokes that fits these categories is the van scene after MacGruber assembled his team. We can assume going forward that MacGruber is going to be followed by this team throughout the rest of the movie. Alongside that, the General and Piper are present alongside MacGruber, with MacGruber reiterating his point about how Piper is not allowed to join the team, with MacGruber gloating about the team and also gloating about how many weapons he has in the van. And just as MacGruber is gloating about how many pounds of C4s he put in there, boom, the team is now dead, and MacGruber is devastated. But to us, it's hilarious, because it's an unexpected subversion. Because by this point of the film, MacGruber is very adamant about the fact that Piper should not be allowed to join the team. Because by this point of the film, MacGruber is very adamant about the fact that Piper should not be allowed to join the team. But now that all of his teammates are dead, well, you know what happens in the end. It's a perfect joke, not in the sense that MacGruber is unlikable, but it's also how his actions can be reckless. Because if he was just a tiny bit considerate, none of his teammates would have been dead. Moving on, another reason why I think the comedy works is the type of scenarios that MacGruber gets himself into. The first one is the nightclub scene, which immediately happens after MacGruber has recruited his new team consisting of Vicky St. Elmo and Sergeant Dixon Piper. But MacGruber's main intention as to why he went to the nightclub is to announce to Dieter that he's alive and he's gonna come for him. And while this is all happening, his behavior is portrayed as erratic. Why this scene works in the movie is because it also shows off a different side to MacGruber's personality. It's meant to show off his way of working on how he deals with a situation. While others think it's incredibly weird, when you stop to think about it, it technically kind of makes sense. MacGruber announcing to Dieter that he's alive and he's gonna come for him would allow Dieter to easily target MacGruber more than if he were to just keep quiet. And while Dieter attacks more quicker to MacGruber than if he were to keep quiet, this also allows MacGruber to catch Dieter easily and confront him in person. It's an example of how a joke can not only be used to be funny, but also to push the narrative further. But I think the scene that really sells the comedy is the scene where MacGruber explains his backstory to Piper, which is essentially that MacGruber, Cassie, and Dieter all used to be college buddies hanging out with one another, but then MacGruber stole Cassie from Dieter, who was his girlfriend, and Dieter tried to kill both of them. Not only that, but MacGruber forced Cassie to have an abortion with Dieter's child. To me, what makes this scene stand out so much is how it uses a different form of comedy to get the joke along. Most of the jokes at this point have been just, oh, MacGruber's incompetence, har har, he dumb. But this isn't a joke about MacGruber's incompetence. It's a joke about how much of a piece of shit he really is. He not only stole Cassie from Dieter, but he also stole his child. If you really think about it, it's honestly understandable as to why Dieter has such a disdain for MacGruber. It obviously doesn't justify what Dieter does in the film, but it also helps us explain as to why Dieter is the main villain. But the scene isn't funny because MacGruber's a piece of shit here, it's also because he doesn't seem to have any sort of reflection about why Dieter hates him. I mean, literally one of his first lines introducing this scene is, "To this day, I don't know," and he just proceeds to casually explain why Dieter hates him. And speaking of that line I just quoted, I think that's the catalyst as to why this scene is so morbidly funny, because the scene essentially has two punchlines. MacGruber is a piece of shit, and Dieter wants to kill MacGruber because of how much of a piece of shit he was to him. It's a perfect example as to why MacGruber being unlikable helps the comedy a tenfold. But if I really think about it, I'm only scratching the surface here, which is why we're gonna move on to the next section as to why I think MacGruber is peak cinema. Anyways, let's go. Another aspect as to why comedy works in the first place outside of writing is also in acting. You can have the most funniest joke in the whole world, but if you don't get someone who can execute it perfectly, well, not many people are gonna think it's a funny joke. It's all about timing and it's all about performances, which is why a comedy needs to nail these aspects all the time. And I guess at this point in the video, you already know that I think MacGruber is peak comedy. But while I just talked about MacGruber's character as a reason as to why it's funny, another reason why I believe it's peak comedy is because of the acting. Will Forte kills it as MacGruber. Every single scene that he is in, he is bringing his literal A game into this role. And it's not only that Will is just being stupid for the sake of playing a character, he also injects a lot of emotions into MacGruber itself. A big example as to what I mean by this is after the scene when all the teammates die. Now having all of his teammates dead, MacGruber tries convincing Piper to join the team, which Piper doesn't agree to, which then leads MacGruber to beg down on his knees for Piper to join the team, which eventually leads to him telling him that he's gonna suck his dick. And what makes the scene so damn hilarious is just because of Will Forte. The way he plays MacGruber going from pretty normal to literally deranged unhingedness is just comedy gold. And that's the best reason I could give as to why Will Forte kills it as MacGruber. The way he just says things. MacGruber can literally say the most dumbest shit, but as long as it's coming from Will Forte, he will damn well make a terrible line into a golden line. It's just the way he channels MacGruber's unlikable traits and turns it into something funny. And because of that, it doesn't feel like the movie ever loses steam at any point. And I can definitely not mention the other characters while I'm on the acting. Obviously, with a comedy like this, there is bound to be some straight man character, and Sergeant Dixon Piper is the perfect character for this. What I like about Piper is the writer's inclusion to have him be a little snarky in some scenes. What I like about this inclusion is that it gives Piper more of a personality than just a straight man. By having him be more childlike, it helps him differentiate from MacGruber a lot more, with their dynamic mostly being a clash against old school versus modern. And I think a good example as to how their dynamic can be pushed to the test is in the celery scene. Piper starts loading up his gun ready to take down some of the bad guys, but MacGruber insists on doing something else. And what does he come up with instead of using guns? This. And to wrap up this section, I cannot mention it, but Dieter von Kuntz, specifically Val Kilmer, rest in peace. One of my favorite scenes with Dieter is when he tries to convince MacGruber that he experienced the same thing when he lost a bunch of teammates. And it's almost like MacGruber has literally taken the bait, and then Dieter just hits him with a "oh no wait, that didn't actually happen to me, you're just an idiot." The setup of the joke alongside Val Kilmer's delivery is literally what makes it my personal favorite scene of the movie. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what I have to say about MacGruber. So to conclude this video, MacGruber is peak comedy, and I want all of you to go and watch it immediately. And what I also want you to do after this video is to go to Rotten Tomatoes and literally bump those numbers up, people. These are just disappointing numbers. These just do not represent the movie at all. We need to change them. We need to increase them. Go, go, go.